Hey everyone, my name is JD with the same tag in-game as well as in Discord. I put together a video on breeding specifically here on the Arkade Legacy cluster. The info contained herein applies elsewhere in the Ark multiverse, however settings will invariably be different depending on the server settings and mods. Please understand, nothing in this video is new information or anything that hasn't been on YouTube, Reddit, etc. However, my purpose was to put together something that can be a reference using the specific mods here and provide a starting point for those who want to breed very powerful dinos. Additionally, I'm not saying that this is the best way to do things. However, if you understand the concepts of the breeding strategy, you can incorporate your own strategies as well as those of other breeders here on the cluster to find the best method given your individual scenario. After the video, you should have a good understanding of the journey from this to this and far, far beyond. Let's talk breeding basics. When you breed two dinos together, there are 7 stats that transfer to the baby: health, stamina, oxygen, food, weight, melee, and movement speed. These 7 stats combine to form the dinosaur's level, which can also be expressed as points. So a level 224 dino has 224 points distributed randomly into these 7 stats, though the speed stat is fixed, and points distributed here are considered wasted. You can use the soul ball in your inventory or spyglass when the dino is in the wild to see the point values. The number on the left is the base stat value, and the number on the right is the amount of additional points applied as you leveled the dino. I leveled this Anki a few points, and here you can see the base stat is unchanged, but the number on the right has gone up to match the levels I put into the stat. There's also some other useful information here, which includes the dinosaur's level it was when wild, or what level it was bred at, as well as how many mutations, if any, it has, and the individual colors it has for its respective regions. Here I have a mating pair of 224 thylas. When I mate them together, they will transfer their stats to the baby. Which stats? Well, there's a 55% likelihood that the higher stat will be carried over to the baby, which is obviously only slightly better than a coin flip. If we examine the high and low stats with this rudimentary graph, where the pink numbers are the females and the blue numbers the males, we can see that if you were lucky enough to pull all the high stats, you would get a 246 thyla. Alternatively, if all the low stats were pulled, the baby would be level 200. Note that the melee stat we have, a 29, is shared by both the mother and the father. This stat is guaranteed to transfer to the baby. It should be now clear to see why a baby's stats will rarely match the stats of the adult. It can be much higher, or much lower, and anywhere in between. The important lesson here is that unless the parents share the same stats, you never know what you're going to get, only the possible range of outcomes. In order to breed high-level dinos, there are a few things you will have to have beyond a mating pair and a safe base or area to breed. You will need multiple S+ mutators and plenty of element to use them. The mutators produce a pulse which costs 10 element each time you use it, and this pulse affects a dino in a specific way. The potential pulse options are create mutation, which when applied at conception of a mating pair of dinos guarantees, with some exceptions, a mutation to occur. We are allowed to use 2 of these during the mating process, so we will get 2 mutations of a stat equaling 4 points or levels. The gender swap pulse should be self-explanatory, however the point here is that any of your dinos can be male or female. The gender assigned pulse applies a gender to a dino that wouldn't normally have it. This is how you breed reapers among other genderless dinos. The allow breeding pulse not only gives non-breedable dinos the ability to breed, but it will also cause egg-laying dinos to gestate, so there will be a live birth. The last 3, age, freeze, corrupt, and aberrant pulses are not specifically necessary in this breeding discussion, so we'll just acknowledge that they are there. There's a 5-minute cooldown once the mutator is used, which is why you will need quite a few mutators if mass breeding. Next item is a cloning chamber, or 10 or 20. Cloning chambers use element shards to make a copy of a tame dino. Cloning chambers help with breeding efficiency, as you can make a copy of a single dino, then use the mutator to gender swap and you have a breeding pair, or simply clone a bunch and use the clones to create your breeding pool. Due to the element cost, this may be a specific individual choice you have to make in terms of how much you use the cloning chamber. Up next we have the nanny. She will feed your babies until they are ready for the trough and also do the imprinting. I use 3 nannies and each needs to have the preferred food of whatever dinos you are raising at its time in its inventory. They are powered ideally with an S+ tech generator or by honey. There's a feeding range and a specific setting for how much of the item they will give per feed, and this can be accessed by holding E and choosing what you want to modify. The reason you would use more than 1 nanny is that they may not always work correctly, so it's good to have a backup or 2, but I can honestly tell you that using 3 nannies, I have never had a baby die from starvation, though there are very experienced breeders on this cluster that use double-digit nannies because of bad experiences, so it may be something you have to experiment with yourself. Once the baby reaches 10% maturation, you will then need feeding troughs, as while the nanny will continue to imprint, the dinos will eat their food from the trough. I'm showing tech, and this should be the standard, however regular will work, but you should ideally be in tech tier if you're mass breeding. Up next is the Soul Terminal. This has many functions, however I'm sticking to the main use in terms of breeding. Soul terminals, when configured correctly, pick up live birth dinos or dinos that hatch out of eggs and store them. Under the newborn auto trap menu, the enable box needs to be checked for this to occur, as well as having empty soul balls in the terminal's inventory. To see the range at which the terminal will pick up the babies, check the visible box. The other main function of this menu is the mating pulse, which will enable or disable mating for all dinos in range. This replaces having to access each dino's options to enable wander and or mating. I personally use the mutator to cause all my dinos to gestate and have a live birth, and this interacts perfectly with the terminal. You can experiment individually to see what works best for you. However, if you don't use the mutator pulse to enable breeding and cause the dinos to gestate, then you will need either CKF bedding or a hatchery to capture the eggs and incubate them. You can also pick them up and throw them in an incubator, put them in front of air conditioners, but it is extra steps. To me, these steps add unnecessary time to my individual workflow, though there are instances where incubation can be marginally faster than gestation. Another helpful option of the terminal is the search function. Knowing what stat I am looking for, I can simply type that number in and look for my stat. The limitation here is that anything in the dino's soul information can also cause false positive results, so you may still have to search through individually at times. You also have the option to rename your dinos here, and you can also spay or neuter them right in the terminal. Okay, we now have to discuss at what points you would consider breeding. Should you look for the clean 50 to 60 point melee Velanosaur since the best you currently have is a 40? My answer to this is that if you plan on breeding to max levels, it's not really relevant. My 40 point melee Velo can be a 60 point Velo in 5 breeding cycles, which could be done in just over 24 hours if I have the time. Now, would I want to start in 10 points in melee? No. But I'm not going to spend days and days of taming trying to get that perfect roll when I could be well beyond in my breeding in the same amount of time. Most people will tame quite a few dinos before beginning to breed, looking for the best stats, and I do the same thing, though I no longer waste time looking for the highest level possible. If I hit 35 points or so, I'm good to go. However, once you do have your best in stat dinos, is it necessary to combine them prior to breeding? The simple answer is, up to you. After the initial breeding cycle, you will have separate stat lines anyway. So an argument can be made that combining them first is a bit of a waste of time. That said, if you do combine and then subsequently breed out that combination as your overall base for breeding, it does make stat sorting easier in some aspects, as the more symmetrical the stats, the easier it is to sort. For this video, I am going to combine the Velos, so we go from these 3 into this one. And you can notice there's nothing great about any of these stats. At this point, I can clone this guy and gender swap, and then I have my mating pair. So, once we have a male and female pair, we need to get a few affairs in order. This is a good point to discuss the term clean as it refers to breeding. A clean dino is one that has no mutations on either side of its mutation counter as seen here. Compare that to this guy who is considered dirty. The breeding strategy we use is clean breeding. Simply put, clean breeding means that one parent is always clean or free of any mutations in its ancestry line. Since a male never has a cooldown and can mate with as many females as possible, we will use clean females to establish our breeding pool, and our male breeders will always be the ones who carry the mutations. If they're females at birth, we gender swap. Okay, now for some basic probability. Let's take a look at our mating pair of Velos. If I'm guaranteed 2 mutations on the same random stat when using the mutators, and I have a fixed amount of stats that can mutate, it's a numbers game. On my Velo, 7 stats can mutate, so if I have 2 parents, that's 14 stats. I'm looking specifically for 4 stat mutations: health, melee, weight, and stam. However, there's nothing to say that you have to do all 4 at the same time, or that you specifically need these 4. The point is that you're going for the best chance of getting the mutation on the stat you're looking for. To do that, you're going to need a lot of females. I'll use at least 15 females per alpha male in my initial breeding cycles. There's nothing to say that you have to use 15 females, however you want to make sure you use enough so that you rarely miss a mutation. Okay, we're ready to do a round of breeding. You can see my male on top with his 15 females beneath him. I'll first hit the allow breeding pulse on the mutator, then 2 mutation pulses, and then enable mating on the Sol terminal. This is my process I use with each breeding cycle. So ARK being ARK, there is an issue we must bring up at this point. After you set your dinos to breed, you may find it beneficial to allow a minute or so to pass and then leave render and come back. I assume this is similar to the taming issue requiring derendering as well. I found this is not necessary in less laggy areas and necessary in others, but this is another component you're probably going to have to determine for yourself. Alright, let's take a look at the results from this first breeding cycle. Now I got 15 babies, and rather than go through them individually, I'll just list the mutations. I had 3 health, 2 stamina, 4 oxygen, 3 food, 0 weight, 1 melee, and 2 movement speed. So I did get 3 out of the 4 stats I was looking for, and this was quite obviously off from the statistical curve. Rather than bore you with another breeding cycle, let's assume I bred the dinos again and got my weight mutation. So now here are my 4 dinos with the stats I wanted. Now, what I need to do is allow these to mature, and these will be my individual separate breeding lines. And they will stay separate for the rest of the breeding process. If one of these happen to be a female, I'll gender swap and move on. What do you do with the rest of the babies? In most cases, delete them. Get used to killing thousands of babies. If raising gigas, I recommend keeping the babies and using them to help level yourself or a dino you are riding, as giga babies give great XP, especially when combined with Broth of Enlightenment and or an Explorer Note boost. The only other consideration with the babies is the fact that with each mutation a random color is assigned as well. I'm not going more into details on colors in this video. Just be aware that if you do want colors, it may be a reason to examine the babies more closely. Rather than just looking at a stat, look at the colors as well. However, I digress. So, I took the babies that pulled the stats I was looking for and I raised them up to adults as seen here. Now they each get their own harem of 15 females and the process is repeated. If there are any other mutations other than the stat I am looking for in these lines, it is completely irrelevant unless of course it's a color I'm looking for. So that's it. 40 points to 254 points and nothing changes? Not quite. We need to revisit that mutation counter. As we get mutations in each stat, a counter is added to the dino's random mutation score. Now why does this matter? Because once your dino hits 20 total mutations, which is counting both sides of the ancestry line, that dino can no longer be the source for any more mutations. Now there was some important wording right there, and if you missed it, I'll elaborate. And this is the most important factor you must understand to breed. A clean dino is still able to cause a dirty dino's stats to mutate no matter how full that mutation counter is. This ability occurs because of the specific order in how breeding stats are assigned and mutations are chosen in the ARK breeding mechanic. When dinos mate, the offspring stats are decided first, i.e. which stat from which parent. Then a potential stat is chosen to mutate, which is hopefully the stat we're looking for, and then, and this is the reason why there's no limit to mutations in our scenario, one of the parents is assigned as a source of the mutation, and this is not in any way linked to the previous steps. So even though the male stat was chosen to mutate, the female can be assigned as the source of the mutation, thus allowing the male stat to mutate. So the limit is only the amount set by the server in terms of individual stat levels, not the actual 20 mutation count. This mechanic applies not only to our cluster, but also official server settings. We're not tricking the system, we're not using a glitch, and it has nothing to do with the use of mutators versus not using mutators. This is simply the ARK breeding mechanic working as intended. Alright, so what does this mean for breeding? If our alpha male is above the 20 mutation count, our chance for getting a mutation is 50%, since he can no longer be the source of the new mutations. To mitigate this 50% reduction, we're going to double our female count, going in my case from 15 females to 30 per alpha male. So my setup now looks like this. And keep in mind, you can use a variety of ways to breed. With the velos, I was leaving the females out all the time, and this offered an easy way to place and replace the male with a very little effort. Now if I was breeding multiple different dinos, I'd be soul-balling all the females after the breeding cycle in order to make room for my new ones. Since there's a fixed range each dino has in which it can effectively mate, you do need to get creative. You can breed above and below as you're seeing with the velos here, Additionally, I recommend a gratuitous use of a whip in your life as well as an arc. It should be a staple on your hotbar. This is about as close together as I could get these velos just throwing them out in lines. However, with the whip, they tighten up nicely. Tossing dinos in a box like the one seen here also forces the dinos to group together into one another, ignoring the normal collision. This is likely the most common method used, and the boxes can be built to accommodate all the different sizes. What I recommend when you're starting a breed or starting something you haven't bred before, ask what people do best. It's tough because there's so many dinos, you're gonna get different opinions, and again, mine isn't always the best. So aside from doubling our females, the process is no different. Just repeat it over and over again. The females will stay, the males will change as their stat mutates. Once you get all your individual stats to a level you're happy with, you're going to breed those stats together to get your powerful finished product. It's going to take a few cycles to breed them together, but by the time you get there, you're going to have a pretty good idea of how to do that. Alright, how quickly can you make this process happen? Well, that's dependent in-game on two things. The first is the mating interval. Once mated, a female will have a random cooldown time where she cannot mate again, as seen here. Each female will have a random range of up to 14 hours. However, males have no such cooldown, so they're always ready to go, at least in ARC. There's nothing we can do about mating intervals individually, but you can always have more females in storage that will be ready to go right away. So if you miss a mutation, you can always use 15 additional females and try again. You can do this for as many extra females as you have available. Alternatively, if you do get the mutation you are looking for, you have to raise your dino, and this is the second time-dependent issue with breeding. You can't start your new mutation cycle until you raise the baby, as this baby is going to be the new alpha. If your baby doesn't take that long to mature, you can have additional females ready to go for another cycle while the first group is still on cooldown. Now this does increase the amount of females you will obviously need, however it also increases the speed at which you can progress through the levels. Maturation time will be dino specific, so considering Arkade runs it 15 times, use Dododex app or something similar to find the exact time for your individual dinos. Velos are very quick and mature in under 4 hours. Knowing my maturation time and my mating intervals, combined with my own ability to be in game, I can basically get a good idea of how long it will take to get through the levels. If I start with a dino with all 4 stats at level 40, and I'm able to do 2 breeding cycles a day, this is applicable only with dinos that mature fast enough, I can get 20 mutations or 80 points in 10 days if I don't miss any mutations. Now if you have longer maturation times, as is the case with a Giga, well, you can't go any faster than what it takes to fully mature the baby. So what am I looking at in real time with my velos? To get from a 40 point stat to a 254, assuming I never miss a mutation and I can do 2 cycles a day, I can get there in 27 days. Probably not a realistic number, but if I have the time and I have enough clean females, it's doable. Alright, as far as max levels go, 255 is the max individual stat level. However, if you go to 255, that stat is locked and you can't add additional levels, as seen here with the stamina mount on this velo. I can add levels to each other stat, however stamina is locked despite having the plus sign next to the stat. Now my cursor decided not to record. Trust me, I can't enter anything into stamina. If you stop at 254 points in a stat, you can then add 99 levels if you choose to do so. So this is where the starting number may play a role in your breeding choice. If you want to hit that 254 number, your dino needs to have an even stat number. If you don't care and you're willing to settle for 1 point less, then you can start with an odd number. You can see with my velos, weight, melee, and health were even, however stamina is odd. I don't personally care because at the values I plan on breeding to, it's overkill anyway, but if you technically want the highest numbers you can get, you don't want to get to level 249 and realize you screwed up. Hopefully this video has provided some answers to some questions you may have had about breeding, but if there's other questions, feel free to message me in game or Discord if you get stuck, or just need some further explanation. Thanks for sticking around, I appreciate it.